Let's click on our World tab, and in this World tab we basically control our sky, our background here. So since a format comes by default with 3 different basic little backgrounds we can use. So we have the white here. If we click render, we see this cube rendered in this white background. We can change it to just black, render that. And I also have a default blue sky set up here, which you can't see the actual clouds and everything in the camera view. We get somewhat of a representation of it, but not fully until we click render. What's really neat about the sky and the environment from in the World tab, this will all affect lighting and things like that on your objects. So if I hit escape, I go over to my material tab, I click new, and then I click mirror on this cube here. Then turn the reflectivity all the way up and hit render again. We now have a cube that's reflecting the environment of everything around it, which is pretty cool. If we click back on the World tab, going down here, so we can get a preview of what our world environment is going to look like here. There's some more specific settings on what our world environment is going to look like also. We have options like horizon color, which we can change that, and then zenith and ambient color, which the easiest way to explain these are they're just relative to the pitch of the sky, and different options like blending the sky, changing the perspective of the sky and stuff like that. The actual clouds here come from a texture that I have set up. So if you click on your texture button here, textures that will affect your world are under this little icon here. Textures that are related to your material are here, and then textures related to your brushes are here. To change how our sky looks, we can create one or multiple textures here to blend through or things like that, or we could just directly change how these clouds look through things like the mapping. We can change stuff like that, and you can see it changing the clouds. And then we can change a lot of little aspects of the clouds, how many layers of these clouds are basically going to be over one another. And then here we have all the different options for our procedural texture generators, which the clouds is one of. This isn't coming from an image of clouds, it's actually being generated by math, which that's what we call a procedural texture. So we could add another one. We could click new, and it could be from an image or a movie or an environment map or any one of these different type of procedural texture options that we have here. Changing the amount of blend here and the influence will affect how this texture overlaps with this one. Of course, these all go back to, if we click on the world option, this effect here. So if we wanted to create an entirely new background to choose from, we can click this plus sign, and we'll see now that we have this blue skies 0.001 in addition to this blue skies there. So we could name this our new sky, and then we could go over to the texture settings, make sure we're on this little world icon, and we could hit X to delete that, and then click that one, hit X to delete that, and click new, and we're on clouds by default, and it looks all pink because back in the world settings we have the horizon set there, but we could change it to whatever we wanted, maybe some kind of dull gray or something, and then continue to adjust these settings to make whatever kind of clouds or whatever kind of sky we wanted. Or we could change this from clouds to something like Voronoi, which is kind of like a cellular looking thing. And under the Voronoi options, we can change the way these things look. We can change brightness and contrast of these things. And then of course we can add multiple procedural textures and then blur them together with the blend option under influence here. And change the way that this is laid down over that option too. We can see that coming through there a little bit. And then so we'd have this weird kind of smoky new background. So if we were to click render, we'd get that. And then since we have this cube with the mirror turned on, it's reflecting all that kind of stuff. Okay, so hopping back to the World tab. Well, under here we have custom properties, which this has to do with more coding type stuff. Under gather, this actually controls the amount of ambient occlusion samples we're working with. So you see down here there's this option for ambient, and I added this so you didn't have to go to World tab and deal with all this stuff every time. I have all these settings set up to really decent settings, but not too taxing on your system, so that you can just click ambient and it turns on ambient occlusion. So you see when I click ambient occlusion there, this check marks because this is actually controlling that. And so the gather settings have to do with how many samples ambient occlusion is taking when it's generating all those boss looking shadows. So if you ever want to increase the quality of the ambient occlusion, you can increase the amount of samples here. Of course, it greatly increases your render time, and so I'll check mark that off. And then environment lighting, this is a way of lighting all the objects in your scene without having any lights actually in the scene. So if I were to hit escape here, and I were to add, double right click and add like a monkey, tap W to give it some smoothing, maybe rotate them around a little bit, tap Z, and then maybe add a torus shape here, rotate it, and hit W to give it some smoothing, just so I have a few little things in my scene here. And then maybe I'll hit Shift C to get my 3D cursor back at the center, press Shift A and create a plane, hit S to scale it out. So what this does is this gives us a very small amount of basic lighting on all our objects, even without any lamps. You could delete all your lamps and just light everything with your environmental lighting. So for instance, if I were to hit render right now, then we're able to see this little bit of added lighting here. And obviously if I were to increase this a great deal and then we render this again, so I'll change this to slot 2, and we render it again. Okay, so we have even brighter environment here because we've increased the environmental lighting. So if it changes to slot 1, you can see it's a good deal darker from slot 2. So I'm going to check mark off environmental lighting and hit escape over here. Going down the line, we have indirect lighting. So the indirect lighting is only related to using approximate gather. Now the type of gather that Sensei format used by default is ray trace because it looks a lot nicer, and by my estimation, using approximate gathering for your ambient occlusion is pointless. It looks really bad. Even a high amount of samples look really bad, so we don't even worry about that.